Welcome back. My name is Sarah Wardwell, and I am so excited to talk with all of you again today. I have to say today has been so wonderful and special. I really loved all of the conversations and getting to meet so many of you. And just getting to be in person is just such a amazing and new thing. Not new, but new again. So I am a proud volunteer member of the GlobalPDX Advisory Board. And in my day job, I work remotely now for the U.S. Department of State as a Foreign Service Officer. And previously, I worked for Mercy Corps as a humanitarian aid worker overseas in Tajikistan, Haiti, and West Africa. The lawyers made me say this. My opinions that I say today do not represent the U.S. government or foreign policy in any way, in case you're wondering. So, for years, I dreamed of having a space like this. This is my husband, Devin. He and I have talked about, we just wish there had been a place to talk about big questions, big ideas that we had about how do you get aid to not be dependent, and how do we talk about these kinds of things, and to get to have the opportunity to talk with experts like these folks here today. And when I was just a graduate student or just a Peace Corps volunteer, and it's never just, right? Like these people, you come in with these great ideas. And I remember being so heartbroken when after I came back from the Peace Corps, I applied to maybe 50 jobs, and I never got a single interview. And I had an informational interview with a recruiter who looked at me and she said, "Nice resume, you might make $10,000 a year after this." And I was so defeated, like, well, you can't live off of $10,000 a year. Pretty sure I'm doing the math right. I have a college degree. So, having this community is just such a wonderful resource for all of us. So I hope that you will all consider becoming members of GlobalPDX, because this is a membership organization, and you joining and bringing more of your friends and your colleagues around is what really keeps this going. So thank you for being here. And now I'm excited to pass it over to our panel. I'm joined by retired Ambassador Niels Marquette, Dr. Dennis Galvan of the University of Oregon, Dean and Vice Provost for Global Engagement, Marieme, the Director of Programs and Partnerships at Vibrant Villages, and Tabatha Rood, Founder and Executive Director of Bamcashea, which could also be said Bamcashea, or Bamcashea.
However you want to say it.
Retired U.S. Ambassador Niels Marquette has served as a diplomat in residence at Lewis and Clark College since early 2019. In his volunteer role, it follows a 40-year career, mostly spent overseas as an American diplomat and later as CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce in Australia. His current role focuses on advising students on overseas careers, as well as giving occasional lectures describing the critical work done by American diplomats to advance the national interest. Career highlights include ambassadorships to four African countries: Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, Madagascar, and the Comoros, and his final posting as U.S. Consul General in Sydney, Australia. Ambassador Marquette's other diplomatic assignments include Thailand twice, lucky, the People's Republic of the Congo, France, and Germany, all but one in economic policy leadership roles. He also served earlier in his career as a Peace Corps volunteer in Zaire and Rwanda, 2 times.
No, I was trained in Zaire and Rwanda.
Excellent. There's a lot of us Peace Corps volunteers in this crowd. I was Peace Corps Guinea. He graduated from Lewis and Clark College with a BA in German literature and earned his master's degrees at the Thunderbird School of Global Management and the National War College. He and his wife Judy raised 4 daughters overseas, 2 of whom continue to live abroad themselves. That is an accomplishment. Dennis Galvan is the Dean and Vice Provost of Global Engagement at the University of Oregon, where he oversees a large study abroad operation, international student services, and global research centers. He's a professor of political science and global studies, specializing in the role of local cultures in challenging global models of development. He's been involved in research and community development relationships in rural Senegal since the late 1980s and in central Java, Indonesia, since the late 1990s. He also has a very impressive collection of Snickers bars from around the world. Marieme joined Vibrant Village Foundation in 2016 to oversee the growing Sub-Saharan Africa and Haiti portfolio. She brings over 15 years of experience in international development with a focus on poverty alleviation, primarily in Africa. Previously, she served as the Africa Program Director for Trickle Up, a New York City-based NGO that focuses on empowering people living in extreme poverty to build sustainable livelihoods through the provision of grants and coaching. Born to Senegalese immigrant parents, Marieme grew up in France and attended NYU's Graduate School of Arts and Science, where she earned a master's degree in journalism. Tabatha served as a Peace Corps volunteer from 2014 to 2016 in Ghana, working in the agricultural sector. During that time, she conducted her field research. Sorry, my pages are sticking together. Sorry, I know you wanted this to be an unconference, but had to go a little old school. She conducted her research for a master's in forest resources from the University of Washington School of Environmental and Forest Services, or Forest Sciences, on the socioeconomic and ecological values of two very different prominent industries, cashew and shea. Working with many of the farmer-based cooperatives she helped establish in Bamboy, is that saying it right? Bamboy, during her Peace Corps service, Tabatha launched Bamcashea in response to the community's concerns over their socioeconomic status and ecological health. In addition to her international work, she is working in Southern Oregon, just like me, as an environmental planner for the U.S. Forest Service. So thank you all for joining me today. So first, I'd like to open it up to each of you to hear about what was one of the most interesting conversations you heard today. And after hearing ideas during this conference, what are your thoughts on what reimagining global change might look like in the future? So, Niels, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, it's frankly, you're all in for a treat when you hear Marieme speak about, we were on the table today about decolonizing aid. I must say it was an eye-opener for me. Just to listen to a really informed perspective on how we all become more democratic and more effective in doing the good things that you all want to do. Imagining the best way to go forward. I guess I'll start with just kind of because of my background, I'll start with a tip for all of you, because I think we're both from the State Department. Somebody else, at least another person in this room, is from the State Department, and I sort of get the impression that I was saying it seems like there might be a negative force field around embassies, that those of you who are out there trying to do things in foreign countries don't really feel like you're welcome there, or that the embassy can help you, or the ambassador would be interested. And I want to tell you, I can't, not every ambassador is going to be interested. Not every embassy is going to be as open as I would like them all to be. But I would just encourage all of you to think of the embassy in the countries that you're trying to work in as a potential ally, and actually reach out. I was just yesterday in a completely different role, where I'm on the board of a small NGO that works in Cameroon, where I was previously ambassador 15 years ago. And I was on a Zoom call with the future ambassador. As you probably know, there's a little bit of a backlog in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, so he's waiting to go out to post. But, so it was easy for me to open the door for this NGO that I'm on the board of. But I frankly don't think that it would have been impossible for somebody just out of the blue to reach out to him through the right channel and say, we operate in your country. So many, I've heard about, some countries have a lot more American entities working in them. Some have very few. Cameroon is on the fewer end. But I think it's worth, when a new ambassador goes out, write him a letter, tell him what you do, invite him to come and visit your operation, and he or she may or may not come, but I think the letter won't just get thrown in the trash can. It's likely to be sent to somebody and saying, well, look, I may not be able to do this myself, but why don't you go and represent the embassy, find out. And in my experience, that's the kind of thing, somebody comes back and says, you won't believe what they're doing there. Half the room seems to be a former Peace Corps volunteer, or returned Peace Corps volunteer. I don't know how many of you ever got a visit from the embassy when you were in the field. I certainly did. It changed my life. That's how I became familiar with the Foreign Service. But people are interested in what you're doing, and quite often an ambassador is trying to, why should I go to that province? And the reason might be that, Create in Senegal is doing great work in that place. I hope that's a little bit of, and I'm happy to talk to anybody. My email is Niels M, my first name and my initial, at lclark.edu. If you want to talk about this more, just reach out to me. Thanks.
Thanks. I totally agree with that. You can email me too, and I can help you find the right people. Also, we all on travel.state.gov, there's tons of information on embassy contacts. Even if you wrote into the American Citizen Services and said, hey, I'm an American, I'm working on this project, somebody will probably help field your email. We definitely want to hear from you, and there's so many programs I think people don't know about, like the Nominating a Woman of Courage Award, which is a major State Department award, but we look to NGOs to nominate people for those awards. Thanks, Galvan.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And thanks to all of you for inviting me, for being here. It's a pleasure to be here. I had a great conversation at the Sustainable Development Goals table back here in the corner earlier today, and it got me thinking about a couple of things related to my world, to higher education. One is pipeline. I want us, higher ed, to be a pipeline to the work that all of you do. And the second is being a mutual resource. I think for the people in my community, undergrads, graduate students, and faculty, there's tremendous opportunities in terms of research connections, and research that isn't extractive, that isn't neo-colonial, research that's really a praxis kind of research in service of communities. And I've been trying to do that for the last, 30 years, since the late Pleistocene era, when I first went to West Africa, to a little village in Senegal, actually. And trying to give back is a really important piece of what we need to do in higher ed. I just want to say a couple things about what's changed in higher ed, because I think it parallels what I was hearing this morning. Anita talked about pausing. Remember way back in the morning when Anita was talking about taking pause and reflection? And I was thinking, that's not what we did. That sounded more, I was trying to think of the metaphor, like a calm lizard basking in the sun. We were like squirrels, frantically, heart rate accelerated, frantically trying to justify our existence because we've been afraid for a while that higher ed is too expensive and too ivory tower and too irrelevant, and the pandemic made that a lot worse, because there weren't any students for a long time, and they were all online. And I think higher ed is still working through the crisis, existential crisis, like why are we here, and why do we charge Oregonians $13,000 a year to go to the U of O, and triple that if you're not from Oregon? So I think as we think about that crisis, if you look at if you're down in Eugene, please say hello when you're there. D. Galvan, Galvan at uoregon.edu. But if you're down in Eugene, you'll see 24,000, 25,000 students. We have a record first year class. Pent-up demand. We have study abroad about to start again. It's already been starting already. We had 230 students go on study abroad this past summer. And we will see record numbers next summer. Pent-up demand. But I think the crisis is still there. The pent-up demand is just a temporary moment. Higher ed, and particularly a good flagship public university like the U of O, we need to make sure students understand that there are real challenges in the world, like climate change, like global inequality, like racial justice. We need to show them that they can come to the higher ed experience to work on those challenges. And when they do that work, it can't just be meandering around through general education. It has to be general education that's there to teach you curiosity and compassion for life around a topic. And then you do a major, and then you do a study abroad or an internship abroad, and you have some way of applying what you're doing. And that's what I think is so exciting about GlobalPDX for the U of O, frankly, and for higher ed in general. If we're gonna make ourselves worthwhile, we need to show our students and families that students are getting real experiences in the world. And if they went to Hopkins in DC, they could do that with State. If they were at Columbia, they could do that in all the big New York organizations. But in Eugene, they can just drive up the road and do that with all of you. So the partnership with GlobalPDX is really important to us. It's part of how we continue to be valuable and relevant into the future. So good to be here, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. What an exciting day. I mean, I had so many great conversations starting this morning. I think many of the people I spoke with know that I am very passionate about several topics. We talked about localization, we talked about representation, And we did talk about decolonizing aid, and that's a topic that I'm very passionate about. I'm a big advocate of supporting local efforts, local organizations, and local leaders. And I was very happy when I was walking around and I saw that table, handwritten topic of decolonizing or work in development. And I was very pleased with the conversations that we had. I was very pleased with the openness. I'd like to share 2 data points, which I did not share in the group earlier today, which is, and I was shocked the first time I heard this data point, less than 1% of humanitarian aid goes to local organizations in Africa. So less than 1%. So that means that the vast majority of the funding goes to international organizations based either here in the US or in Europe. In terms of grant funding coming from foundations, it's less than 5%. Less than 5% of US money that goes to Africa goes to local organizations. And I mean, you can conclude what you want about that data point. For me, it means, and sometimes people don't like when I say that there is inherent racism and inequality about the way the funding is distributed. And people have a lot of bias about the capacity, about the ability of local organizations and local leaders to achieve change in their communities. And I speak from experience when I tell you that there is no better actors, no better stakeholders to bring change in their communities than the people who live in those communities. And we had very candid conversations about the role of US organizations, the role of Peace Corps volunteers, the role of NGOs, international US-based NGOs, who all have great ideas, great intentions, but I think now is the right time to think about the role that those people can play and make room for local leaders who have great ideas and frankly are in the best position to bring change in their communities.
Thank you.
Hi, that's tough to follow. But all of you are tough to follow. I will say that as I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ghana, we were told not to go to the embassy, so I don't know how that relationship goes, but they were like, you dirty hippies can stay over there. We've got to be. So I'll work on that. I'll reach out after Peace Corps and I think it'll go better. Yeah, I think I'm particularly motivated in my international work for the environment, and that's kind of how I work here in natural resource management. This organization that I'm running is outside of my normal duties, and we have no paid staff in the US, and part of that is kind of Robin Hood-esque to get the money to the local organizations where people are asking for help. So I think some of my favorite conversations this morning happened around environmental justice and really empowering people to value their natural environment that they've been subsisting off of for years, that we use as a resource base largely for our consumption. I think it's really fascinating also how many different people are here. I moved to the Oregon coast during the pandemic, but had been to some of these events and have never seen a lot of these people here, so I think this is really beautiful again. And the interdisciplinary nature of it. You know, I'm not a business person, but I am helping businesses to develop in Ghana around agriculture and natural resources. And I just really love that there are people talking about the need for natural resource managers to get involved in international development and for the empowerment of those local people to change their communities. I think it's interesting you brought up also Peace Corps volunteers, and we've been in Ghana since 1961. You know, a lot of those jobs and those paid jobs would be better, more effective if they were done by local practitioners who don't have to learn the language or go through the same cultural hoops, only to then have their own bias. So this might be my favorite conversation so far, but definitely lots of good ones today.
Awesome, thanks. All right, so I'd like to go back to Ambassador Marquette and ask you to tell us. It's really, I think I'm probably loud enough. Can you hear me okay?
No, go ahead, use that. I'll just turn this off if I can.
There, I got mine off. Can you hear me okay? I tend to be a little loud. All right. So back to you, Ambassador Marquette. Could you share with us a little bit about how you've seen the role of U.S. government change in the last 20 years or so, and where you think that's headed for influence?
I might actually go back 40, unfortunately. That's how
Even
old I am.
better.
But, you know, I just want to talk a couple minutes about democracy, because I think Andrea at the beginning of the day said, well, how do we share power? Was talking about conversation she'd had. Obviously, democracy has got to be part of the answer to that question. And, you know, the span of my diplomatic career went from, you know, there being almost no democracies in the world except in Western Europe, Canada, the US, and Japan, maybe a place or two beyond that, to 25 years later when I went out to Cameroon as ambassador. It was kind of the high water mark. You know, the Cold War was over. So many countries had democratized. And the US had played, like, I think, a huge, probably the leading, the loudest, the most, you know, well-funding voice around the planet in helping organizations countries become democratic by supporting those who wanted to lead that change within those countries. And, you know, it's so sad to me, right, at this point, 15 years after that kind of high water mark, to see that it's been a gradual decline. It's, you know, it's nowhere near as bad as it was 40 years ago or even 30 years ago, but there's this, you know, democratic backsliding that's gone on. And so, you know, in so many countries. I mean, Thailand, where I spent 2 tours in 5 years, you know, is one of the sort of top 10 to go backwards, number of coups in the last 15 years after, you know, what appeared to be a very promising embrace of democracy in that country. That, you know, there are many countries where that's happened. And I think what I'm really looking forward to, and I do believe it's possible and even likely, is the United States finding its voice again on these issues, finding its credibility. I think after the last, you know, 5 years or so, you know, I can't imagine saying many of the things that I said as ambassador in democratizing, you know, countries, or hopefully democratizing countries, without just being sort of, you know, having it thrown back in my face. So we've got to get our act together at home. We've got to show that democracy can deliver. I mean, some of the things that our president is saying about, you know, the Summit of Democracies that's going to take place before Christmas, it won't be without controversy, because not everybody who's invited will satisfy everybody who's watching this, and the criteria may or may not be what you would hope. But the notion of demonstrating that we can deliver, that authoritarianism, you know, look at all that great Chinese infrastructure, that's what we're competing with. But life is not just about shiny buildings and bridges and new roads. So I'll stop there. That's a little bit more of a lecture than I wanted to deliver. I apologize. But I think that's one of the big changes that I see is, you know, the U.S. having lost its voice, and we're losing the battle unless we can figure out a way to reverse course.
Thank you. Thinking along those same lines, we've seen a decline in international students, is that right? And what are you seeing in the future, with your crystal ball, of course? What are you anticipating in the future for the trends of international students? Do you think we'll regain our position as a place where students want to come to study?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we were, for example, at the University of Oregon, we were 13% international students, 3,400 in fall of 2016, and now we're about 1,000 students, so about 6 and some percent. I think one of the things that the pandemic and the previous administration did was it kind of cracked the model that had existed throughout the post-war period of US higher education as the premier destination. And Commonwealth countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the UK, started to eat our lunch in terms of higher education. It's a relatively good offering, and it's a lot cheaper. The Chinese government, which is China is a big sender of international students globally, is really moving more aggressively into partnerships that transfer teaching, curriculum, whole courses into Chinese universities, which makes perfect sense. If I were Xi Jinping, I would do exactly the same thing. I think the thing that, in my observation, teaching a little bit in Europe, teaching in Africa, the edge we still have is the flat democratic, horizontal nature of our classrooms, where students are actually really encouraged to challenge the authority figure of the teacher. Very, very hard for international students to do, but when they get it, they participate in a kind of dialogue that can be incredibly empowering and does teach real critical thinking skills and creativity in a way that has fall-on effects way outside of the academy, makes possible things like out-of-the-box innovation in all sorts of sectors of our society. I think in order to really attract international students, we have to recommit to that basic foundational education, which is what we used to call the liberal arts education, in learning to read across cultures and contexts and histories, and think critically, and argue about human values, and argue about how human values tell us what to do about those big challenges like climate change and decarbonization. We can do that, but in order to do that, students, whether they're domestic or international, have to get out of themselves. They have to decenter. They have to learn that they're not the only ones with the right values and worldview. And the best way to do that is to get out of your home culture. International students are doing it all the time. But what I'm excited about is making sure that every domestic student in the US has that international experience, because when they come home, it's a little mini Peace Corps thing, and they come back a little bit not so sure that we're the best country in the world, and a little bit willing to consider alternatives, and they become good ambassadors for the kind of work that you all are doing. So I think higher ed needs to sort of get back to its basics, but also recommit and reformat around making a difference in the world, which again is why GlobalPDX is such a great asset.
Thanks. I love that.
All right, I want to pass it over to Marieme and get a little more granular. This year, Vibrant Villages has done something really incredible. You have been able to pass over the funding to from restricted funding to unrestricted funding, and you're giving it directly to African-owned organizations. Is that right?
Yes.
I would love to could you tell us a little bit more about how that's been going and how you made that shift? And that's a monumental shift. Tell us about that.
Thank you. So it's related to the question of localization and decolonization that I described earlier. So when I joined Vibrant Village Foundation 6 years ago, the majority of the portfolio was international organizations based here in the US, and 100% of the grants were restricted. And what a restricted grant does, basically, is that it forces an organization. Is it working? I'm sure you can all relate as 501c3s. Should I just give up on the microphone?
I think Jennifer's going to bring you another one
Let's
here.
try switching back.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
It forces an organization. Is it working? I can't really tell. To plan year to year. And resubmit a budget to a funder, and then allow that funder to nitpick and say, nope, you don't need a new car, nope, you're paying your staff too much, nope, you don't need to do that, and really strip them of all autonomy around the change that they're trying to bring in their community. I've heard time and again partners tell me that they lost staff because they do annual contracts. And if the staff find a job where they have a long-term contract, they'll leave, even if they like the work, and they'll join an organization that gives them job security. I've had partners not go to communities that are in need, in the most urgent need, because it's too far, and they don't have the right car to get there, and they will have to pay too much money in gas to get there. And so I've been advocating since I joined the foundation for unrestricted funding, so we can give the local organizations the flexibility that they need to design the program that they need in order to achieve the impact that they're trying to achieve. And it takes a lot of perseverance, a lot of patience, a lot of calm, because I had to go through a number of conversations with my colleagues to convince our funder that it was the right thing to do. And like most donors, he has very good intentions. He wants to do good in the world. But I think there is this inexplicable need to retain control. We would get questions, how do you know that they're really spending the money they say they're going to spend it? I don't know, and plus I don't think they really need to spend the money they say they're going to spend it, because nothing in life goes the way you expect. And so we need to give them enough flexibility so that they can pivot and change and adapt as the circumstances in their communities change, and be able to respond to those needs. So number one, convincing, and then number two, trust. So we had to find a way to build trust with the organizations that we were seeking to support, so that they felt comfortable sharing their entire plan, because an unrestricted grant, a general operating grant, basically means we trust you, take this money, go and do very good work. So they have to share with us their overall organizational budget, information about their board, their long-term plans, and once we have all that information, the big shift for us is to be comfortable with, that's all we need. We take this, we trust them, here's the money, and then go do good work, and be okay with less reporting, be okay with reporting that is not tailored for us, be okay with less ongoing communication, which frankly I always call micromanagement. Right? Like every time I'm being asked, so when did you last talk to the partner? What are they up to? I was like, I don't know. They're in the field. They're busy doing very important work. They're not going to sit in the office answering my phone calls. And so it's a mindset shift. It's one that we're all in the organization very excited about. I would not say that it's monumental, but thank you very much for that nice comment. I think we're not the first ones. I mean, definitely not the first one. I think a number of very progressive funders in the country and also outside of the US have already made that shift. And I'm very happy that we're able to make it this year. We still have a few international organizations in our portfolio, so it's not going to be cold turkey. We stop funding international to move solely to local, but that's our sort of like objectives, like as our funding grows, because one of the big components to this shift is that we have more money over the next 5 years. And in that push, we are trying to direct as much as possible to local organizations. So it's going to be progressive. And we have gotten very positive response from our international partners. I mean, they all are sort of like with us in this shift. And they really understand that the local organizations are in the best position to deliver the programs.
All right, thank you. I'll let you pass it over to Tabatha next. Tabatha, can you talk to us a little bit about how you see development can be more environmentally conscious or more sustainable?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's all about being unrestricted. I think that the unconference is really appropriate for this because, I'm a huge fan of open sourcing. Everything on the internet is open and free. I think that we need to be that way with our environmental science, with the lessons we've learned from industrializing our country and all of the ecological impacts we've had from that process. And as we go and develop or help other places develop, we're empowering them to value their environment in the same way that we've seen ours tanked. So I think that it's possible through what you're talking about, giving the money and trusting people to be doing the right thing. I was having a discussion earlier about having the assumptions that the people that you're going to want to help would want to then go into maybe recycling. It's unrealistic. The women that I'm working with want to buy new shoes and they want to buy a TV. That is just the reality. So operating under the assumption that they may not spend the money in the exact same way that you would think or hope, but they're hoping to have life, love, and the pursuit of happiness in some specific way. So one of the ways that I've been doing this, at least in my project work, is working with organizations in the US to share information, just technological advancements like industrial-sized cook stoves, reducing the impact from the beginning of the process to the end. So as we're kind of helping develop these industries for people to really take care of their environment, but also value their resources as living things rather than just as commodities, we can help them move to 50 years past our own industrial development, so that the impact and the sustainability of that industry is lasting. One of the other things I would say as far as socially equitable is really important is giving them the authority to make their own decisions. There are a lot of people in Ghana that are very interested in solar. They have the resources to do it. The raw resources are there. The main barrier to that is the capital behind intellectual property. And I find that to be a huge barrier in international development in general, is that people are needing some support for that baseline administrative, maybe it's related to reporting or tracking of their effects rather than on the ground implementation. So I guess the quote that I want to say is like, a good plan today is better than a perfect plan next week. Environmental justice and the climate crisis are all public safety issues. A lot of these social problems that are persistent will not matter if we don't have the resources to provide for ourselves as a human race. So I think we need to really be collaborative, really be sharing those white papers from higher ed to be implemented in a much shorter time frame, especially working in the government sector. It's amazing how much time and public funding goes into research that does not meet that implementation. And unfortunately, international development is even further behind that. So I'd just like to see more open information, more sharing without the need for some reciprocation, either monetary or credit-wise.
Awesome, thank you. We love that. You've got an audience here with the university. Opportunities for collaboration, that's why we're here, right? Well, I'd like to open it up to your questions now. I could ask them questions all day long, but this is your opportunity. Well, you guys have not been quiet all day. Yes, Mr. Miller.
I couldn't help but ask a question for Niels about democracy. It sounded like, and I get the general notion that that's kind of pretty much a good thing most of the time, but are there situations where you would say, well, democracy is not the right answer for that country?
Democracies, no, I wouldn't say that about any country. I mean, it might not look like ours, and I think, there's so many laws that the United States has about how we spend our aid money that actually require them to be democratizing. But we don't tell them how to do it or what it's supposed to look like. I just spent 7 years in Australia, a very different form of democracy, but maybe even a better one. It's certainly a country that I learned more than I could teach them, because they knew so much more about the United States anyway. So I think democracy is the right answer everywhere, but they have to figure out what it's going to look like in their own context, and we need to make sure we don't get overly excited about telling them, share our example, sure, but not say it's the only one. So, short answer.
Thanks. Other questions? Yes,
I was
Andrea.
for Marieme. Could you share more about, you said that other organizations have done what Vibrant Village is doing. Are there forums that you're also learning and sharing the way Tabatha was explaining among other philanthropy and donors that you get to learn about ways to do this and share some of what you guys are experiencing?
Yes, I don't know how formal the network is, but we are part of a network of US-based donors, funders, comprised of several foundations. The leading one, which you may have heard of, is called the Siegel Family Foundation. They're based in New Jersey, and they're, I think, the second largest donor in Africa. And that is how I came across the concept of or this movement of supporting and featuring local organizations. And they were the first ones to make that push for, one, unrestricted, and second, really highlighting local organizations and the work that they're doing. And third, which was most interesting for us at the foundation to discuss and look at, is to change our expectations for what quality looks like. So, being Western-centric, we are used to having people speak English in a certain way, write reports in a certain way, interact and sell their programs in a certain way. And so sort of like letting go of that and being much more open to a multicultural, different way of communicating. And Seagull is great at doing that, and they have a lot of resources. They created a second entity, which is independent now, called the African Visionary Fund, which is basically a pass-through fund. It's a US-based, and that basically takes care of the excuse that a lot of US funders have, which is, oh no, we cannot send money to Africa, tax reasons. I think there are many ways to overcome that. But the African Visionary Fund is basically an entity here in the US that allows US-based funders to fund local organizations through them. And if you go to their website, that's where I borrowed the data point about the amount of funding that goes to local organizations. They have tons of resources, and they help us in terms of how we advocate and how we talk about the issue. So,
Great. Yes. Other questions?
I also have a question for Marieme, so I'll just tag on. How are you folks looking at duration of funding? Are you funding in multiple year cycles? How are you answering that question along with these other changes?
So I'm very glad you're asking that question. So the shift just happened this year. So January 1st, yay, big celebration, and that was our first wave. We won one battle, we didn't win the war. So our president and founder only agreed to annual grants. And so our big objective in this last quarter of the year, where we're getting ready for renewal, is to convince the foundation and the board that it's time to do multi-year, because it doesn't solve the issue. I mean, there's still the issue that they're going to lose their staff and they don't know if they're going to get funding next year. And he tells us, because he has such good intentions, he said, well, of course, just tell them to believe us. And it's like, would you would the bank trust you that you're going to pay them back just with your word? And so even though we say that and we try to be reassuring, they need a contract that they can show their staff to reassure them that we're going to be there for a long time. And so that's the idea, that we're looking at 3 years, hopefully. And what we're communicating to our grant partners is that we're there for the long run. And if we are to stop funding you, we will give you enough notice so that it doesn't create any hardship. But we'd like to get that on paper.
I love that question about how far out are we looking and how far should we look in your industries. How far out are you looking, and how far do you think we should be looking?
Tabatha?
Sure.
Yeah, I think, Sarah, you brought this up earlier, how in Japan they have 100-year plans for their government, and I think that's incredible. And I think we need to be planning for that long. Shea butter is a traditional practice taught by women to younger women. It's a very long process, but there's so much cultural exchange that happens during that process. And it actually produces more butter than the machines. So I think we need to be looking at the future of the planet. The climate crisis is a good time frame. Much like how we're preparing for earthquakes, for an inevitable situation on the West Coast. We have enough science and enough theory that's been proven at this point that we should be planning for 100 years. Generations benefit rather than just in our lifetime. But we've definitely got to move quick.
I would just add, it's there's no coherent answer in my industry. Students are thinking about the midterm next week. Faculty are thinking about getting through the class. That's 10 weeks maybe. But I think there are parts of our institution. I mean, the enrollment management people are thinking about next year's freshman class because that's tuition dollars. Parts of our institution, at least at U of O and elsewhere, are thinking grand challenges. Number one is climate change and the environment. We're launching a big initiative. We've been good at this for a long time and no one knows it. Even we don't know how good we are in the environment and climate change as a university. It's part of who we are in this state. So I think what I'm seeing emerging at the U of O is a major push to sort of pull the parts together and make the whole much bigger than the sum of those parts, so that we actually do emerge as one of the leaders on solving climate change issues, and particularly for us on questions of environmental justice, because that plays to our strength in terms of a good law school, good humanities. So that's a 10 to 30 year play, and I'm glad to see my provost is thinking about it, but it's, you know, it's episodic and it's scattered in a big organization, a big industry like higher ed.
Niels, I wonder if you could comment on that, but thinking through, in your career, you've seen administrations, political administrations come and go, and how do you see us, you know, thinking about change and preparing for change, knowing that the, you know, political whims are beyond our control, whether our own or foreign in other countries?
I think Marieme kind of put her finger on it when she said, talking about unrestricted funding, is you don't really know what's going to happen. And, you know, we actually, in government agencies, in the State Department, we spend a lot of time coming up with plans. I found it rather annoying to, over all those years, every year, to have to come up with this plan, and it was almost always an annual plan. And I think I came around to the view that I was wrong. I shouldn't have been annoyed. It was really useful time spent, because just preparing for things that could happen. And one of the things that changed was we noticed when we looked over at the Department of Defense that they had 4-year plans, quadrennial reviews and planning, and they also had a much better success with the Congress getting the funding that they wanted. And so when Hillary Clinton came in as Secretary of State about 10 years ago, she brought that idea with her. And then we went from 1-year planning to 4-year planning. And I think that's a really good exercise. Nothing ever turns out the way you think. But just having a plan there that you can look at and go, okay, well, that was wrong, and it will always be wrong. But that should never be a reason why you say we wasted our time planning, which I did say for a while.
I like that, and that really leads me into another thing that I've been thinking about a lot today, which is in the beginning of this day, Anita said it was unprecedented. And it really wasn't unprecedented, because like Guns, Germs, and Steel is a very well-read book, and that tells us that germs kill people more than guns. So why didn't we see this coming? And I've said this to other people today too, but people said, oh, the Afghanistan evacuation was unprecedented. It was our longest running war. Wars usually, unless you're in Korea, they usually end. And so why didn't we see this coming? So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, you know, why didn't we see this coming, but also what are we not thinking about the future that we should be seeing? What are you thinking about as experts in your fields that might be coming down the pipeline that we need to be thinking about? Now, who wants to take it first?
I'll go first.
All right.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the trees, because that's what I know a lot of. Food, cash crops, and the lifespan of trees that are really our supply for a lot of things. I think we should be thinking about local movements, you know, in the vein of decolonizing aid. We should really be taking care of our communities and making sure we have healthy communities to be models for the places that we want to go and help. And I think we're seeing a huge breakdown of that. So I actually did go to Ghana this year. As soon as I could get my vaccine, got it because I had some grant funding to go plant trees. And shade trees take 85 years to mature. So if you think about the span of your life, you're probably not going to plant a shade tree and be able to harvest unless you're really healthy. But the shea butter industry is supposed to increase by 9% over the next 10 years. It's an amazing beauty product that people are learning about. But what we're not doing is actively planting shade trees or even preventing them from being cut down. So I think the coupling of this is the local movement is really going to be the only thing that allows us to look towards the future and plan and see what's going to be coming down the pipeline, because what I see now is all of us in this room really trying with good intention to see a world that's better, but we have to kind of start first with ourselves and then our communities, and then worry about how we can help other people. But I would just encourage everyone to look into the supply chain of wherever you're getting your most consumed products. Can you get it somewhere closer to you so it's not being shipped across the sea? Can you make your own things? So you're not kind of encouraging this kind of unfair trade market. I think that's kind of the first step, I would say.
I love that.
You want to go ahead?
This question, it was unprecedented, like a couple of paradoxes in it that I want to just talk about. First of all, we did see it coming. We collectively, I didn't see it coming. I don't know if Niels saw it coming, but there were experts who saw this coming. This is not like an alien invasion or something. And maybe that was seen coming too, but.
Someone's thinking about that.
Yes, exactly.
A lot of movies.
A lot of movies. So I think that, of course, that paradox is we didn't plan for it. We didn't take action because it was costly. It was costly to powerful institutions, and it was too costly to consider that collective action problem. So the second paradox, though, which is the one that really bugs me, we talked a little bit about it in the SDG group, is right now, the next delta is incubating in somebody's body in an unvaccinated country or in an unvaccinated community in this country. And we could easily, I think the figure is 50 billion, maybe. If we talk about the numbers that are being discussed in the Democratic caucus right now, today, this is a tiny amount of money to eradicate this virus, to vaccinate everybody. And we don't have the collective action will to do anything about it, which seems to me mind-boggling that we can't muster this to pay for vaccines across the planet. And I think this should trouble globalists like us. And I feel deeply guilty about this because I feel like higher ed has a responsibility to open awareness and educate, and we're utterly failing. We are not educating the citizens of Oregon, that third or so who won't get vaccinated. That's just a tiny tip of the iceberg of this problem. So I feel like it's very precedented that we can't summon the will to solve easily resolved collective action problems, and we need to overcome that. And climate change and those trees being sort of first and foremost.
Love it. Go ahead. Did you want to answer? Marieme?
I think the last words were climate change, right? No more needs to be said, or maybe a lot more needs to be said or done.
Marieme, did you have any thoughts on this?
Not on that, no.
All right.
I was going to piggyback on the community. I can just say a few words about community-led development. Yeah, when you ask what is the next thing coming, I have absolutely no idea. But what I know is that, like ourselves in our own lives, communities in the countries that we serve through our programs, they have a sense. Like everybody kind of like has a sense or a sense of the contingency plan that they want to put in place. And so that's sort of like the shift that I'm advocating for constantly, community-led development. The voices have to come from there, and then it will make for a better plan.
Thanks. Any final questions from the audience? I think we have time for another question if anyone wants to be so bold as to raise your hand or just stand up. Oh, two! Yes! All right! All right, I think I saw Noreen's hand up first, and then we'll go to you.
Okay. Well, mine was just really quick on that point about talking about, like, people knew that a virus might have been coming and all that, but there wasn't that sense of urgency. So I guess how do you create that sense of urgency? There's a lot of issues that are going on. I mean, my focus has been on emergency preparedness for the big one and being like, yeah, it's going to happen here, but we don't really have any plans in place. And some people are like, well, we just need a short wake-up call, and then we'll be prepared. But how can you do that without hoping for an earthquake to do that? So I guess, in general, with these kind of things.
That's great. Yeah.
I guess the one thing I would want to say about that to a room full of globalists who are on the progressive side is we won't get anywhere unless we're thinking creatively about how to reach our conservative fellow citizens and how to bring them into a sense of self-interest about the issues that we care about. Pandemics, climate change, global inequality, those things matter to our conservative fellow citizens, but I don't think, or maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I think as globalists, we tend to not do a great job of translation of our ideas to that other part of our population. And I think that's not the only answer, Noreen, but that's the part that keeps me up at night.
Love that. Do you want to add on to that?
Okay. I just wanted to add, I think the last statistic is 20% of Americans leave the country, which is, one of those things that if you're just not exposed to what it's like, you can never be prepared. And you have no framework of why you would care about children anywhere else other than where you are. So I would just encourage more people to be getting out. And then economics, everyone looks at the red line, follow the money. I just think tying your financial health to the health of the planet or the health of cultural understanding as an economic tool will bring some of those people in. That's what I'll say.
Love that. Any other thoughts on that? And do you want to, add on, please.
Yeah, so you guys mentioned the word environmental justice in a lot of your conversations, and I just wanted to say, ask how do you guys implement environmental justice and make sure it's being achieved in your organizations, or how have you seen it change throughout your career as well?
Anyone would like to go first? I've gone first every time.
I guess to be, we're getting towards the end. We need to end on some kind of hopeful note. I mean, I would say there's so many, we talked about the pandemic, and climate change is even worse when it comes to people not paying attention. But on environmental justice, I mean, I really think there is an emerging understanding that it's part of our foreign policy. It's part of our how we distribute our aid. It's not nearly enough, but I think it's. I've seen such a change over the course of my professional life in terms of achieving some kind of level of common understanding about what needs to be done. And just in the last couple of years, through all these terrible things we've gone through in the United States, the progress that's been made in reaching people, to your point, I think reaching people that were absolutely not part of the conversation or not understanding it, I think you're right. We haven't found the right wavelength for a lot of that communication, but there are a lot of people that do understand that what we've done, the way we've done things up till now is just unfair, and we need to address it. So that's my hopeful note.
Thanks. Anyone else want to respond to that question?
Go ahead. Yeah. Okay. This is super important. With the women's cooperative I'm working with, we're working with shea butter. We have a facility that we've put in a rainwater catchment system. We've got them a mill to help with some of the labor of the process. We installed some fuel-efficient cook stoves, large cook stoves, and then recently just planted trees. And throughout all of these projects, it's really been about education. Just like I told you guys, 85 years to mature. We have to make sure you guys still have shea. Illegal logging is a huge threat to shea. It's a fire-resistant species. It's perfect for burning. And sadly, the value of one shea tree as charcoal is only about $1. And you can make butter from that tree for 25 years after it's matured. So I think a lot of it is education in implementation of these projects. And then relaying, we have to elevate the value of these resources as living and as ecosystem services, as valuable to our own health while we do this. And so I think it really just goes back to education. That's the best form of environmental justice. Sadly, as the climate crisis gets worse, those that are already losing out are losing more. And so I really would like to see, I'm hopeful, but I would like to see these places we need a global prioritization based on climate. Who is most vulnerable? We need to deal with these places first. And who's most culpable? Carbon credits, be as creative as they are, don't always reduce the impact that we're having on the environment. It's led to a lot of awesome innovations, but I think we really need to look at how can we actually reduce our impacts to these communities that are already marginalized and going to be most affected by climate change.
That's great. Yeah, okay, one quick question? Great, please.
I love this. I'm sorry I came a little late. I was thinking, I had a question about the human at the center. We use that kind of too loosely, I think, a lot, without really understanding what it really means. And 30 years ago when I was teaching, and I would see the close link in civilizational studies with diversity, equity, culture, and sustainability. But at that time, if I was talking to people, they couldn't draw the link. They would see culture and countries very different from sustainability and climate. Now we are drawing the link. And because I've been focusing on these for that amount of time, I see the third-legged stool, which is now the silent space we are not discussing, and that's this entire digitization and AI that actually already I see very much in here, but people are not drawing that link. But that's another kind of, talking of justice. Like if you call anybody, so they're not making the things anymore, but then the phone calls, they've all disappeared from here. Nobody has phone numbers, Google or any place, even Canada or anything. They're all kind of, people are staying up over there. And so it's a whole, but people learn and educate on the human platform. That's my book, so don't take the title, please. I'm thinking about the human platform is changing. To me, it's the superstructure, that space below where like we build our homes, that land, and the communication. The kids are losing it. I mean, I have a kiddo too. If you don't grow up in that space, like you're saying, if you don't go and you see that, in the same way, if you don't have those dinner table conversations. So I kind of see a really big clarion call to engage very much locally with everybody you can and hang on to that human platform, because just like we lost the tail and other things as things happen in evolution, the ways that we are human today, what are most important to us collectively to understand and really kind of get down to the nitty-gritty, and then be intentional about carrying that forward for this next generation and their next generation. Because in the end, the biggest technology we've ever created in the world through millennia is this communication. And then the writing, when we started writing. Those are the things when we just completely take away phone calls and everything is twittering or, that's like less than 7% of human communication is words. And twittering is probably like 2% of the 7%. So I just was curious to hear your and other people's thoughts on that.
Do you want to respond? Yeah.
I'm going to try and connect that to the environmental justice question, maybe. You asked, what are we doing about environmental justice that's new? I think recognizing the whiteness as a white middle-aged male person, recognizing the whiteness of a certain approach to the environment, particularly, and to nature. And I think this goes to the question of culture and language, and it goes to the question, Marieme, of unrestricted trust in partners, in people actually doing the development for themselves. I think when I think about the whiteness of the long history of the environmental movement, I think of mastery and I think of protection as a sort of like very Western capitalist mode of dealing with the environment. And when I think about rural Senegal, I think about, the environment can kind of kill you. It's not exactly a thing that you have mastery over, and you don't always want to protect it, because bad stuff comes from the environment sometimes. And so I think opening ourselves to other ways of being with the environment, of knowing the environment, of thinking the environment, creates a plurality of ways of solving the problem, and also opens up the political space to let people do it their way. And for me, as a middle-aged white male educator, privileged person, to shut up and not tell other people how this should be done. So on that point, I think that's a hopeful thing we can do, and I will stop talking.
I love it. I'll take that back. Thank you. And thank you for that point and that question. And thank you to all of you for your questions. I just want to give you guys, again, another round of applause for everybody for being here today. You showed up, asked questions, listened. Thank you. A big thank you to our panelists. They are all experts in their fields and all ongoing learners, too. We never stop learning. So I hope this was valuable for all of you today. I was thinking that the conference theme is reimagining global change. And the real idea is that we're going to walk away and we're going to commit to something, some action. So I want to give you a moment to just reconnect with that reason why we came here. And aside from thinking about where you're going to order at happy hour, and you're definitely ordering Cajun Tots because you came to McMinimans, what is one thing you're going to take away from today and either reflect on or do? Just give you a moment to think about that. And then I'd like to ask our panelists,
either one thing you're going to walk away thinking about, or even just one word that really just stuck with you that you're going to be thinking about going forward. Can I start with you, Niels?
Sure.
All right.
I was really, I loved the opening panel this morning. I thought everyone was terrific. Britt, who was talking about Oregon's welcome to Afghan refugees. I really want to go back and figure out what my contribution will be to that process, so that in fact Oregon does welcome them properly and better than we have in the past. And if I can do that, that will be a really positive outcome from today.
Thanks.
In the before time, my part of the university gave grants to faculty to work with you all. And we just got it going, and we got to get that going again. So collaborative, practical research grants. That's not one word, though.
That's great. That's a great action. Even better.
And for me, it's connection. I mean, I really enjoyed today and connecting with so many new people. I had lunch with a student, and I have to say that I saw myself 20 years ago, starting in this field and not really knowing which way to go. And it was really a pleasant experience. And so connection and solidarity.
Wonderful.
I would just say creative solutions. I think the pandemic has been unprecedented in a lot of ways, and just the world gets crazier every day. But if anything, it's just showing us that anything is really possible. But everyone that we're following these rule books of people that were just doing the best they could 50 years ago. So I think it's really cool, the creativity in this room and how many people are doing so many different things to try to solve this problem for everybody.
Awesome.